Candy and Viola asked us to come and give an update, I suppose, from our perspective of where asset management is in 2018. We've been delivering asset management to local governments in WA for a few years now. So Mark and I have put together a bit of our view of the world, I suppose, of what we see along the way. But before we get into the asset management side of things, I thought we'd get kicked out of the Consultants Guild if we didn't talk about ourselves first. So was watching this TED talk from Simon Sinek recently, and he talked about people buy people buy what you getting confused here. People buy why you do it, not what you do. Okay, so we had to think about that ourselves and why we do things. We do things really, when get down to it, to try and make the communities we work for a lot better. And a big part of that, we just don't do asset management. We do a lot of other things, flood recovery works, service reviews, those sorts of things. But a big part of it is asset management. And one of the things we always try and make sure we do is have fun along the way. That's a bit of flood recovery work and a bit of asset management at the same time. We all like to fly around the place. Mark flew up here today in his plane, so we service the whole of WA. So hopefully our perspective today is from a whole state perspective and even interstate. That's Mark up in Kununurra making sure he's doing some flood recovery planning and then enjoying himself afterwards. And that's us. Anyway, so what we're going to talk about, I thought probably the key things, case studies. You know, Mark and I like to play good cop, bad cop, so he'll probably tell you all the positive things and I'll tell you all the negative things. But
then we might roll into bad cop, worst cop a bit later.
Yeah, that's right. So the first few things there I'll talk about: asset renewal, demand modelling, condition, asset life, forward capital works planning, and then Mark will talk about capital evaluation, level of service and leadership. So the first thing there was the asset renewal. Those that have done our asset management courses and that in the past, workshops, would have probably seen these slides. The one thing we always need to do is make sure there's clear understanding of the key definitions in asset management. So the definitions that we use are maintenance of day-to-day activities that you do to ensure the asset reaches its intended life. So it's things like pothole patching the road, getting up on the roof with the silicon gun, those sorts of things. Then operations don't add any value to the asset whatsoever. They're things like insurance and security, cleaning, those sorts of things. They're more presentation amenity type issues, and Mark will probably talk about those sorts of issues when he talks about level of service. Then the next definition, which is probably the one I'll talk about most today and bang on about, is renewal. So renewal is the cost to bring an asset back to new at some point in its life. So if you want the roof on this building to continue to deliver a level of service and keep us all dry here and that sort of thing, at some point it's going to wear out, and you're going to have to, if you want that level of service to continue, intervene to do something and replace the roof. And that's the major thing I see that we need to nail down. The next definition is upgrades. Upgrades are things that happen when you renew things and make that asset a little bit bigger. And then new, the asset never existed in the first place. So one thing I see with local governments, you know, I'm an engineer, so I probably can bag the engineers. I tend to bag them a fair bit. The engineers, I feel, get too bogged down in the detail of things. The first, you know, asset management, the first solution most, particularly the large organisations, want to do is let's go and buy a bit of software, a database, and put someone in a back room and plug away at it. And you never see anything come out of it. I've been to big local governments, metro and small rurals, you know, things like Roman. no one's ever seen a report come out of the thing. It's important not to get bogged down in that level of detail. The other thing that people like to do is build asset management plans around asset classes, so that you might have a road or transport asset management plan or a parks asset management plan, those sorts of things. They're good, particularly if you're a big organisation or a metro council, but if you're a small rural or remote local government, you don't need all that level of detail. Just get it all in one plan. Often when we go to a local government, and we do a lot of this work now to support grant funding applications for like BBRF grants and those sorts of things, to show that the local government can actually afford the asset that they're asking for the grant for into the future. So we build a bit of a sustainability model based around the asset management for that bit of facility, and we're quite successful because that's what the feds and the state want to see these days. But often we go into a local government to do that, and it's the first time that the local government has seen all of their assets on the one sheet of paper, and I think it's very important to do that. So it's no point having all your roads stuck in an asset management plan somewhere over here, and meanwhile your buildings are falling to bits over here. So that's the first thing we try and do. Get all the assets on the one sheet of paper. I know local governments do it for financial reporting, but financial reporting is, people don't sit there and wade through financial reports all the time. Elected members and the punters out there need it in simple terms. How many assets do we own? So this local government here, you can see they own $67 million worth of assets. This is a real local government. Of those $67 million, only 42 million of those are depreciable assets, because a lot of it's road formation that doesn't depreciate. So as I say, people tend to like to get in the back room in databases and fill them full of stuff, and hopefully a whole heap of other stuff comes out. But it's very simple rule of thumb. And we've done heaps of asset renewal modelling, and it always works out about this. Whatever the depreciable value of your asset is, if I can get this thing to work, down here, 42 million, between 2 and 4% is what that local government needs to spend year in, year out on asset renewal demand. So that's what you should be striving to achieve. You don't need to do complex models. You do, I wouldn't say don't do complex models, because we do that, and they're very helpful down the track when you want to get into the level of service type areas. But always come back to the high level stuff and the broad rules of thumb to make sure that you're on the right track. And if this local government was thinking of building a new facility, a new rec centre or something like that, it'd be very simple to say $10 million, what's 2% of that? It's going to be brand new. If you're taking on an older asset, because there's always other tiers of government and communities and those sorts of things trying to push assets onto you to take on and look after it. If it's towards the end of its life, asset renewal demand's probably closer to 4%. So that's the broad rule of thumb. So for this local government, it's between $8 and $1.6 million that they need to be spending. Physical condition definition is the physical state of an asset. I don't quite agree with that. Our definition that we use is an estimate of where the asset sits within its life cycle, based on one or more criteria. So, and that's what we're trying to do for asset management, and that's what you're trying to do for fair value. One of our things that we try to instill in local government, and I see day in, day out doesn't work too well and needs to work better, is once again, the engineers are in the back room with the assets doing condition on one sort of scale. Another part of the organisation might be doing it on another scale. And then the finance people are trying to do financial reporting. All three need to mesh up. So you need to have one condition scale through the whole organisation. And my view that the 1 to 5 that IPWA uses is not sufficient. And it says that in the condition practice note, that once you get into more advanced asset management, you may need more sophisticated condition scores. So we use a condition score of 0 to 10. I don't really care what you use. If you want to use 1 to 5, 0 to 10, furlongs per fortnight, I don't really care. Just make it consistent throughout the organisation that everyone's using the same system, not one for buildings and a different one for roads and those sorts of things, because it ends up millions of dollars difference in your valuations and your asset management and importantly your ratios. Okay, so we've talked about renewal. The concept is bring it back to new at some point in life. And this is the other thing, is that often people don't use condition, they use age and those sorts of things. Here's an example, little matchbox truck. So as I say, we use condition 0 to 10. 0 is brand new, so that truck looks like it's brand new. That truck's looking like it's at the end of its life, or pretty close to it. Condition 10. It's as simple as that. At some point in its life, if you want it to continue to work properly and do whatever it's meant to do, you need to renew it and bring it back to new. And that's asset management in a nutshell, trying to work out when are you going to do that. It's the optimum time to replace the asset. So I probably won't bore you too much with this, it's start to get complicated, putting up graphs and stuff like that. But I suppose what I wanted to say about this is that, you know, local governments spend a lot of money on collecting data, doing valuations, all sorts of things. You come to audit, the auditors query you, how did you come up with that unit rate? How did you come up with that condition? Those sorts of things. Not many people ever ask the question, how did you work out how long the asset's going to last? So you can put all the money into the left-hand scale, the condition, so the asset starts off new, deteriorates to 10, but how long is that going to happen over? Because that affects your depending what purpose you're using it for, your depreciation expense, or when you need to intervene to renew the asset. So I just see too many local governments don't invest enough effort in this part of the exercise, and it's starting to get to the advanced stuff. I mean, since integrated planning came into place, I think most people got the asset management plans in place now. There's probably a few that still don't, but they're largely inventory plans, a list of assets of what you own. So, which you probably knew in the first place anyway, because all you've done is combined a whole heap of other lists, insurance registers, maintenance registers, whatever. So a lot of local governments now know what they own, which is good, because in the early days, I mean, I remember going to Broome and they gave me a list of 20 assets and we found 190 buildings. So from that list. So yeah, you generally know what you own these days from what I see. And some local governments are good with the condition assessment, those sorts of things these days, and collecting that. I don't think that gets collected regularly enough. But they're not good at working out how long the asset will last for. And it's not easy to do that. I mean, I walked into local government office once up at Dongra there, and we were having a discussion about that, and they said, how old do you reckon this carpet is on the floor? I said, well, probably wouldn't put it in the lounge room, you know, it's a bit, the colours, although it's probably in fashion these days. It looked brand new, but it'd been there since they built the building in 1960 something. So, you know, it's very hard to come in and say, well, how long is this carpet going to last? How long is that the tin on the roof? But you can make broad approximations. So, you know, we've done building asset condition assessments for Vic Park, Vincent and Cambridge. And between them, they've got 300 buildings between them all. And when we started work with Cambridge, they said, oh, we can't even get a tradie to hang a door. do you know anyone that can help? I said, no, we don't do that. But why don't, you've got 300 buildings, the average life of your roofs is going to be 25 years, so you've got to replace 4% of them a year. Go and put out a tender for 10 years and get the builder to come and do it when it needs to be done and collect all the asset management. Oh, yeah, that's a good idea. But it never happened. But there's plenty of opportunities like that in local government. As I say, once you've got condition, the value, you know what you own, that sort of stuff, you can plug it into a model like we use, which is Maloney's, and it'll spit out your long-term average renewal demand. So that's what you need to be trying to achieve. I mean, what did I say? The figure was between 800,000 and 1.6, I think it was, back on the other slide. So you can see there, 900 sits right in the middle. If the local government's assets are older, in poorer condition, it's going to be higher. If they're newer in good condition, it's going to be lower. So it's a good check. So it doesn't have to be all rocket science. And then, importantly, look at what that renewal demand is across all of your asset classes. This is where I say people tend to model all the roads and put it in a road asset management plan, and the buildings put that in a building asset management plan and don't combine the two. So often you can see significant trends with these things. You can change around grant funding and those things to try and plug some of those gaps. The work that we did in the early days on this in Victoria, the average renewal gaps across local governments there, I think were around about $3 to $6 million per local government, and they came down over about a 3 or 4 year period. Not because the local government found more money, they just found or became more expert in understanding their assets and what all of these modelling parameters and those sorts of things are. You can tweak these things, these models, to the cows come home and probably get it down to nothing. I remember working with the boys at Swan there. I think their first model, they had about $30 million gap or something like that, and the new director was saying, Bruce, there's no way that it could be that. I'm driving around, I can't see any potholes in the road. So we spent 2 days going through, critically examining every parameter in the model, and the biggest thing that was creating the gap was they had something like 140 odd playgrounds, and the recreation guys wanted to replace the playground every 10 years or something like that. So they're trying to deliver the same level of service across every playground. We said, well, that's never going to happen. You'll have some key playgrounds that you might want to do that, but there's going to be others that you're going to push out to 14, 15, even 20 years. So when we walked out of there, I think we had the gap down to about $2 million. So you need to critically review those sorts of things. Yeah, and this is one thing that I still see day in, day out that local governments don't do. It's so simple, it's a no-brainer, but I don't know why they don't do it. It's probably a little bit better across WA now. But this is the model for that local government that I showed at the start between the 2 and the 8 and $1.6 million asset renewal demand, and the models told us it was 900,000 a year. Now, we then looked back in their annual financial statements and went back 6 years, and the average that they spend over 6 years was 900,000, which probably doesn't look too bad. But what you can't tell is how much do they spend on renewal and how much of that's new. You know, you have to actually speak to the officers and find out, well, this $2.3 million, this is roads to recovery funding that they didn't spend and they built up for a couple of years, and it's all building new roads. So that might be fine in the short term, but what about in the long term? So, and that's the other thing I find, that even with the councils that are at the cutting edge with this stuff, don't put a lot of effort and time into forward capital works planning. So you should all have, I mean, you've got to have long-term financial plans these days, but do you have robust forward capital works plans underpinning those long-term financial plans? And does it clearly identify the percentage of renewal in each project going forward? You know, you can easily get the first 4 years right, and then, you know, try and target the renewal demand coming out of your asset management modelling for the outer years. But it's just basic stuff. If you're not doing that, you're wasting a lot of effort on other things. So they're the things that I'd be focused on getting your condition assessment right, consistent across the organisation, getting your renewal modelling all on the one page, so you have all your assets in the one spot, not spread through 10 asset management plans. Understanding your modelling parameters, and in particular asset life. I mean, that will help you not just for asset management but financial valuations. And splitting your budgets out so that you clearly identify asset renewal. So a few have probably seen this graph before, this slide before. Your normal operating budget, capital budget, all your maintenance and operations in one, all your capital and renewal in the other. Got to split this up so that the elected members and the staff can clearly see the split between operation and maintenance. Okay, you can still have them in the one job number or whatever if that's how you do it, but you need to be able to pluck it out and understand how much you're spending on operation versus maintenance. And it's very important that you define within your organisation the difference between what is maintenance and what is renewal, because it's a very grey line. My definition is, if you go down the rec centre and the toilet door's hanging off the hinges and you can screw it up, that's maintenance. If you go down there and it's gone, it's got a hole in it, and you've got to go down to Bunnings and buy a new one, that's renewal. So in your ratios, you only get credit for capital renewal. So you need to have to think about that. How do you track all of this non-capital renewal? We've got a lot of local governments now that are reducing the capitalisation thresholds so that they're capturing more of the asset renewal. Then you've got your upgrades and news, and then importantly that you understand every time you build something new or expand it, there's a net maintenance impact and a net operational impact from that, and it's got to come back and be added to the bottom line over here. And not a lot of long-term financial plans capture that. So it's a challenge to build that in. So typical capital works budget, and it doesn't matter what local government I go to, this will suit the biggest and the smallest. They'll generally present a list of their projects like this, total cost. But you don't understand this 2.8 million, how much of that is renewal and how much is upgrade and new. So simply add 3 other lines and make an estimate. The pavilion upgrade is part of an old pavilion getting replaced, 200,000, 150,000 to upgrade the kitchen, and $750,000 to put the new set of basketball courts on, which got you the grant to replace it in the first place. The roof library here is just like-for-like replacement, 25 grand. I won't go through them all, but straight away, in particular the elected members, and you guys as staff can see, out of our 2.8 million investment, half of that is helping us be sustainable. Because if you can't, my view of sustainability, if you can't on a long-term basis fund 100% of your renewal demand, you're not sustainable. So you haven't made the hard decisions to get rid of the old Shire halls that no one uses anymore, and you've built a rec centre in town, and you're just building more and more assets. You like the cockies with 10 combine harvesters out the back shed, and you've got a new one in the paddock. So a lot of local governments, it's getting better, I must say, because they're starting to take heed of these things, And I appreciate a lot of these decisions are politically difficult to make, but if you can put the figures up here that help the elected members that really want to do the right thing in terms of financial sustainability, they'll fight the fight for you guys. You won't have to fight that fight at all. And we've seen it time in, time out. So straight away you can see half of that's helping you meet your sustainability requirements. The other half is adding a future burden to you. So you need to include the net maintenance impact, the net operational impact of those, and that should get added to the bottom line of the operating and maintenance budget. You know, and there's still local governments in WA where a 1% rate increase probably only gets them $15,000 to $20,000. So you go and build a half a dozen barbecues somewhere because you've got some nice royalties for Regions grant, or not that you can get them these days, but some other funding thing, or the Rotary Club might build them for you and give them to you. You know, it adds up to $100,000 a year over 10 years for a barbecue. So that's the important thing. So that's the end of my little talk. I'll hand over to Mark, and he can take you through level of service.
These microphones aren't allowed to be.
Oh, okay. I'll go this way.
Thank you, Bruce. Asset management is all about being prepared. So to get prepared for this talk, I spoke to one of our team, Ben Talbot, who's an accountant. I'm told there's a few accountants in the room. So I said, I want to make accountants laugh. Tell me an accountant joke. So he scratched his head and he thought for me and said, oh, Mark, my dad always said there's three types of people in the world. Those that can count and those that can't. Dad jokes never get our style. We have a lot of first world problems in core. The reason, and I think you probably understand as accountants, it might seem, fun and sexy to fly planes around the state, and it is, but it actually saves us a lot of travel time because we believe that it's really important to be out there where your people are, where your clients are. So next week we're going to go out to Nunnadarrowlands, which is, does anyone know where Warburton is? Alice Springs? Yeah, it takes you a couple of weeks to get out there if you're driving, but it's 4 hours away for us, so it saves a lot of time. And it's also very, very nice, a nice way to get to work. This morning, it's actually quite sunny up there. I pretty much just got in my boardies and jumped on the roof for a bit of a sunbake on the way up. But we do have first world problems, and that's trying to find parking at Jandakot when you get there. Trying to park your plane and boop, boop. Anyway, I'm going to take that off you if I may. So the other bits of real preparation that we did is speak to a lot of other local governments that we know, and I just wanted to get, this is a little bit of a, asset management in this forum, in this context, integrated planning reporting. It's been around for about, 10 years now? Would that be right? Since we've been doing strategic community plans and corporate business plans and asset management plans. So we wanted to say, okay, well, what's changed? What's worked? What hasn't? What are people doing? And probably, I'm a bit of the good cop in the organisation. I'm really interested in what are some really good examples of what's working so you can take it away. Who here has a capital evaluation process or framework that you use? Or who has one first? Raise your hands. No, that's okay. Next year. Well, the second question was, do you use it? So I know of at least 4 councils who have put in place a capital evaluation process and they love it. So I'm going to just talk to you quickly about what that is. It's basically a process of reducing complexity in decision making. We get asks all the time, don't you, in local government? So both Bruce and myself started our careers in local government. And, I just remember there was this steady stream. It was like one every couple of days of someone coming in, hey, did you notice we don't have a water polo pool in Albany? Or, we need an ice rink next to it because then we can use the refrigeration off that to heat this, and then it's perpetual energy. Or we need an artificial ski slope. Do you get those? Lots of people come up with ideas, and then everyone gets all excited. What capital valuation does is it takes a lot of the emotion out of it. So we use a framework for our decision making so that every project goes through the same process of approval. Results may vary. Everything should be made as simple as possible, but not simpler. Obviously, these things can be complex. I've mashed up 2 from 2 of our clients. Capital evaluation, the process actually involves a lot of steps. But when it boils down to it, it's not actually that complex. So what we do is prepare a project input sheet. And as a council, what you do is you make sure every single project you have the same pro forma that you use. In assessments, they can be half a page. Obviously, depending on the council, so some of the Eastern States councils, they manage water and sewer, so one pump's worth 50 grand. And you can have a community development project, an event that's 20 grand. So how do you compare apples for apples? Some are more complex, some are risky. So there is a bit of a process in there in deciding, some thresholds, what has to go through this process and what doesn't. But basically, you prepare a bit of a sheet, and then it goes for initial valuation. Why do we do that? Why do we just do, what we call the acid test? It should only take about an hour to prepare the first sheet. Sorry, just keep getting over that flu. The reason is because there are so many ideas, and you don't want everyone to have to go through a feasibility study process and spend $20 or $30 or $50,000 on an idea that's not going to go anywhere. It's much better. Get your idea down, run it through the process, get it through executive, have a look at it, will it fly? If it makes it through that process, and say if you're a manager and you get officers coming up with those ideas, you don't have to shoot every idea down. If it doesn't work, you can actually go through and say, well, let's tweak it a little bit. But the idea is that you're doing that roughly at the same time each year, before your long-term financial planning and budget process. Goes through a full proposal, an assessment, then it goes to council. Obviously, at each of these stages, the proposal can be modified or it can go through. And then, if approved, we can put it into a long-term financial plan. So when councils do these, the ones that we've worked with basically put it through a process of criteria evaluation. So consider your strategic community plan, I know everyone has one, and your corporate business plan. What are your objectives? How well does this project stack up with those objectives? And then it gets a number. Now, it's almost like a tender assessment process, and I know we've all done a lot of those. So it's almost like every project you do comes through a little tender process. It doesn't actually have to be hard, and it doesn't have to be complex, because it actually can be quite a good process that you're going through. Then we look at the asset management imperatives. What is the whole of life cost? Rather than just looking at the capital, because I remember, the heydays, particularly in the country. Who here's from the country? Yeah. How much fun was royalties for regions and people throwing money at us, and just building stuff whenever you wanted. It was great. But obviously we have to pay for the ongoing renewal, don't we? So what is the whole of life cost? And particularly, who's going to pay for it? Is it something where someone else is going to an asset that we're going to, or they want to give us something that we're going to manage over time? Or is it something that has some ongoing funding attached to it? Is it something where we dare to do something a little bit of a commercial imperative, like maybe running a gym or something like that, where it actually offsets the cost of the swimming pool, things like that, which I know, local government's been doing that for a long time. But compared to something that, I know when you're moving into the health sphere, there can be, you can get funding for some things, but other things can cost a lot of money. So we've got to look at what is that. Project risk and likelihood of success. So what do councils say about it? Pretty much, emphatically, the ones I've spoken to have said, yes, we put it in place 3 years ago, and probably the biggest one is an Eastern States Council, $5 billion asset base, runs water and sewer. They do everything through their capital evaluation process, and they absolutely love it. They said it takes some of the ad hoc decision making out, but not all of it, because there's always cool, sexy projects that they just come up and people want to do. But when I asked them to just estimate, they said probably it takes about 80% of the ad hoc projects out of the process. Is that a good thing? It means you're making good decisions with your money. And what another council said is they actually use their capital evaluation process for when they're doing feasibility studies. So feasibility study, someone's got an idea. I know someone from the audience, give me one. What's an idea for a capital project? Anyone? What do you got on the books that you want to? Someone's got to say something. New swimming pool. That's a great one. So is it going to be 25 metres, 50 metres, indoor, outdoor? Do you want a outdoor water playground like a lot of councils are doing? What are the relative merits of those? So basically you can actually prepare a very simple input sheet for each of those projects and then run them through the capital evaluation. If you use that, it means that all of your feasibility studies, because we all use consultants for feasibility studies, they can all be different, can't they? They can use different comparators. But if you use your own process, they all go through the same process. And that means your analysis is the same, which means your results should be comparable. So what they say is it works. Now, I'm going to roll through mine fairly quickly because I know that you probably have some questions afterwards, of either myself or Bruce. So we'll roll through this one, go into levels of service, and then ask for questions afterwards. But basically, I guess the thing is the councils that have adopted said it's a little bit, it's a little bit of a process to start. It's probably about 3 months to implement, but once it's in place, it's fantastic. Levels of service. Wouldn't it be great if you could just do that? It actually is. Now, who's got levels of service in place here? Anyone had a crack? Yeah. Where are you from, sir? Harvey. Great. And how's it going for you? Yeah. No, good. Yeah, I'd be interested to hear a bit more later. Local government delivers services. That's what local government does. So the definition of levels of service is to provide the current and future community want and are prepared, levels of service the current and future community want and are prepared to pay for in the most cost-effective way. Every single thing that we do in local government can be measured in a levels of service context. Anyone got an example? Well, from Harvey, what's an example of one of your levels of service? That's all right. So this is one of my favourite slides. Bruce did this, but I use it in all my presentations because it's really funny. But basically, an example is the storm drain. There's two types of levels of service. One is the one that the community understands, which we use in plain English, and the other one is the technical one that the boffins do. So what do they want out of a drain? They want it to protect the property and be safe. This is little Timmy. This is the best bit of Microsoft PowerPoint I've ever seen. Oh, still like that every time. Now, obviously, we don't want that. So what are we going to do? We're going to put in a barrier with a hydraulic capacity of 1 in 100-year storm and access barriers. And then little Timmy's safe. Apologies if that triggered anything for anyone. So different councils present their levels of service differently. It's okay. You can do that. It really is up to you how you want to do it. But what it's about is it's about measuring. One of my good friends said, if you can't measure it, it doesn't exist. He's an agronomist and he's all about, plant growth and things like that. But I remember getting, you get phone calls from people in the community and they're not happy about something that's happened. When you have levels in service, like say, for example, someone wants trees, they complain because council's come through and trimmed all the trees by the side of the road. But then someone else complains because you haven't trimmed the trees. So what you do is you say, we're going to trim all the trees within 5 metres of the road. You get the complaint and you say, you have a look at it and you say, thank you, sir. Ma'am, we've actually trimmed those at 5 metres and that's our levels of service. So we've met our obligations of levels of service. This is how we do levels of service. If you'd like to, if you think it should be 6 or 4, come along to our levels of service workshops. So it actually takes the heat out of the matter. And it really does. That's what people say when it comes to complaints. Because we're actually telling the community what we're going to do and then we deliver on it. So basically, every single thing you can do can be measured in levels of service. For example, customer service. So your customer service representatives, one of the customer service standards you can have is they greet your customers within 20 seconds of arrival, say good day, answer the phone within 5 rings, emails are returned within the same day, those kind of things. They're measurable and they can be adjusted. Another customer service is how often we mow a verge. There's so many things. How often our youth centres are open, how often the opening hours for libraries, all those kind of things, and also your technical service standards for grading roads and reshedding roads and all those kind of things. So imagine if you documented all your levels of service and then when you're in budget planning, and this is the interesting thing about it, we talked about capital evaluation earlier, this is almost about service evaluation. Or service, part of your service planning. So just 3 of those examples which I gave before. So let's imagine your reception answers all telephone calls within 5 rings, customers greeted within 30 seconds, all emails are responded to within 1 business day. Youth centre is a safe place, meets all requirements, open till 10 p.m. Roads are graded every 12 months. Now at budget time, we want to save some money. So you can't actually say, has anyone done project management? In project management, you can only modify one thing at a time, can't you? If you want to put the quality up, it's going to change something like cost or time. It's the same with levels of service. So let's just say, with that little BMW switch, let's say we want to save some money on customer service. We're going to take a person out. Okay, what's the impact going to be? We're lowering the levels of service, so we're reducing the cost, so we might put that down to 100, but we might need to recognise that the phone calls might go to message bank. Okay? I'll come back to that in a second. With our youth centre, we might want to open it till 12 because it's a rural community and it's hot and the kids want to play basketball. That's going to increase the cost, isn't it? Okay? Intervention of 7 out of 10 is actually pretty good for an access road. So a lot of people, if you understand that from the country, you can probably push that intervention level out to an 8 or a 9 out of 10, which means it's not as smooth and save a bit of money. So levels of service go down, your cost goes down. But where the real planning is if you list all your levels of service, get your community involved and your council involved, prioritise them in the list, and then you can make decisions about the lower order ones. What's the most important? Because the other things, you can crank them up too. You can increase your customer service if you want to. But the second step is, once you understand it, then you can do other things. For example, you can think about demand planning or how we're going to change things without actually adding to our cost. So let's say we want to dial our customer service costs down, but what else could we do for efficiency? Or we want to increase this service but keep the costs the same. What efficiency measures could we do? And I know you think about those, and I think everyone in local government does all of these things, but I think a lot of people do it in isolation in comparing their services as individual services. What levels of service does is it allows you to do it as an overall whole. What do councils say? Well, interestingly, everyone, when they do levels of service, finds big wins straight up. So one of the big councils up north, they had 5 people that were doing their verge mowing at a time, because they have a verge the size of the foreshore of Perth. And so we said, we'll just replace some with some native veg and take one of those guys off and put them somewhere else. There's 100 grand a year, which is big bickies for a shire of that size. Everyone finds big wins, but what we found is a lot of people struggled to put it in place over the long period of time, because it's simple but complex, and a lot of things you actually need to have a will to put in place, in terms of you almost need to invest in the actual levels of service as an ongoing thing and have someone doing it and someone putting it in place. We haven't actually seen many people really put it to its full potential yet, but I actually think it's probably one of the most exciting, one of the most beneficial things local governments could pursue. So I'll hand that to you in terms of deciding whether you want to, whether you see any benefit in that. So that's level service. I'd like to invite Bruce Lorimer up. And do you have any questions of myself or Bruce? And if you don't, we could tell a joke or do a dance or something like that. Any questions from the floor? It's always hard, the session after lunch, because digesting. Yes?
The question is, just in regards to establishing these service levels, how did you work with the community or councillors or a bit of both?
Absolutely, yeah. The foundational levels of service are that it needs to be community driven. So one of the really good ways of doing it is doing it alongside your strategic community plan engagement. So it means that you're not duplicating resources. So particularly with remote communities, we do that a lot. And that was actually one of the funny stories Bruce asked me to say, is because when we go out to remote Aboriginal communities, so Venice, the lady that went out there, she said, she always goes and knocks on the door at 6 o'clock because home and away's on and she knows everyone's going to be there. So she's really good. So yeah, it's important. It really does take the heat out of the matter. What we find with levels of service is you get your engagement right and you actually get 9 out of 10 people on your side. But that 1 out of 10 person, you never get them across the line, no matter what, because you go out and talk to them and they're upset about something that's happened 30 years ago or something like that. But if you had 5 out of 10 or 3 out of 10 people on your side, putting level service in place, you can get 9, because any argument is not about a complaint about what's happened. It's about, did you meet the standard? If you didn't meet the standard, we apologise. Or, like a local government can say, I'm really sorry. Our levels of service is that all potholes are identified within, repaired on a major road within 2 hours of identification. That one was 2.5 hours. Really sorry, we're going to look at our processes and not do it again. Someone complains and we look at them and say, oh look, our levels of service is 2 hours. We actually got to that within half an hour, and that is our standard, and we think that's pretty good. Or do you think that's okay? Does that make sense?
If I can just add to that too, Mark, when you develop your level of service, what you've got to do first is document your current levels of service.
Of course.
So that's all in your heads, as officers. So don't go to the community with a blank sheet of paper, whatever you do. You've got to go to them with, this is our current level of service, and you need to know the existing cost of delivering that. So when you do your community engagement with your SCP and that, you should be out there with your asset management plan under one arm, your long-term financial plan under the other, and sitting down with the key stakeholders for that service. Not everyone. No point asking everyone. Just get the key stakeholders involved and have that as an ongoing process that you continually review.
That's right. Okay, any other questions? Thank you for having us. Really nice to meet you all.